It's no secret the PlayStation 3 and its cell processor was a very complicated system to develop games for, and that made it nearly impossible for them to be utilized to their full potential, especially if there were third-party titles. Polyphony Digital, the team behind a franchise known for developing games that best showcase the PlayStation consoles what they're capable of graphically, concurred with that fact as combined with work on the spin-off titles and prologues meant it took 5 years for Gran Turismo 5 to be released. And what we got were 1,000 cars, mostly rehashed from Gran Turismo titles on the PS2 and PSP, and buggy and undercooked in certain areas. But still a very impressive achievement, and the premium models were a superb showcase of looking as close to real life as you can get on PS3 hardware. It went on to become the best-selling exclusive on that console, which proved that despite the wait, the Gran Turismo franchise was a guaranteed moneymaker for Sony, so a sequel was inevitable. But having taken a long time to develop GT5 meant the next generation of consoles weren't far away. So what were Polyphony planning behind the scenes? A year later, Kazunori Yamauchi confirmed Gran Turismo 6 was in development, and while Turn 10 confirmed their next Forza Motorsport would be a launch title for the Xbox One on May 2013, once Sony announced the PlayStation 4, Senior Vice President Michael Denny confirmed that Gran Turismo 6 would still be a PlayStation 3 exclusive. A very curious decision given the PS4 would already be out by that point, but as history has taught us, you can never force Kaz to meet a deadline. He'll release something when it's done, and he's allowed to do that because Sony know Gran Turismo games sell well. Kaz did consider a PS4 version months before the announcement of GT6, but decided to stick exclusively with the PS3 since they already had a head start, so the only thing they needed to do was add more of it, providing an even larger scale title for a console that was now much cheaper to those considering buying one. The development team was spotted scanning the Mount Panorama circuit in Australia, and celebrating the 15th anniversary of the Gran Turismo franchise at Silverstone, confirming that circuit would appear in GT6 as well. A demo was on display and released worldwide, giving players an opportunity to enter the GT Academy trying to post the fastest time. They also announced Vision Gran Turismo, a series of concept cars developed by multiple manufacturers. Models made for this game is nothing new, including the Nike 2022, GT by Citroen, and the Red Bull X 2011 and X 2014 co-designed by Kaz and Adrian Newey. But this was a fully focused initiative, first mentioned in the trailer for Gran Turismo HD, with every model looking like they're 2 decades into the future. And Kaz also went to Brazil to set up a partnership with Instituto Ayrton Senna, where a percentage of the game's profits were donated to the organization to help those underprivileged in the nation. Kaz called Senna my greatest hero, and without him I don't think the game would ever have been created. With a Brazil exclusive of a PS3 console with Gran Turismo 6 bundled in featuring Senna. Gran Turismo 6 itself was released for the PlayStation 3 on December 2013, a month after the PlayStation 4 console. And unlike GT5, I never paid close attention to the development, partly because I was more hyped for Grand Theft Auto 5 at that time. And I even assumed there wouldn't be another Gran Turismo for the PS3 because the PS4 was already out. I remember visiting a JB Hi-Fi one time and seeing it on shelves, and I was like, oh wait, there's a new Gran Turismo game? And for some reason I didn't consider buying it at that time because my interest in the GT series wasn't there. And my nostalgia for older games in general didn't come until a year later when I created this YouTube channel and played the older Gran Turismo titles on the PS1 and PS2 first. I eventually got Gran Turismo 6 for my collection after getting this Logitech Driving Force Pro racing wheel, which came bundled with a copy of that game. So the first time I played this, I was more interested in working out how to use the racing wheel and trying to get it to rotate 900 total degrees while driving around Mount Panorama. Thankfully, because I got my own house now and plenty of space to use this wheel, I can use it again for this re-review. If you've seen the original review, then you'll know how much of a nightmare it is to install all the updates without the risk of crashing the console. But you'll want to because some of these updates include a few extra cars, events, and circuits. No DLC, all free. My memory is a little vague with the way I handled installing every update because every time I try to install all of them at once, it would crash the PS3 every time. I was worried it was virtually impossible, so what I did was install one update at a time, then cancel out to make sure it didn't install another so I didn't have to start from scratch in case it crashed again. I think it was only one update in particular in the middle amongst the 20 million updates that gave me a very hard time. I had to restart the console multiple times until eventually installed before the rest of them were a breeze. Fortunately, having the same PS3, I've kept the updates after reviewing it in 2016 so I don't have to relive that trauma again. You could say it's a good precursor to how stable this game operates when out on the racetrack. When everything is finally up to date, it doesn't take you straight to the main hub like most Gran Turismo titles. Rather, you're sent to a tutorial on Brands Hatch to learn how the driving mechanics work, where you're constantly interrupted by text in the middle of gameplay. I honestly don't know what's more annoying, the license test taking a long time or this. And then you're given a very generous 30,000 credits to start with. But there's a hook. You don't get to choose your first car. You can go to the dealership and try to pick what you want, but the only car you're allowed to purchase is the Honda Fit. Not that I don't like this car, and it's a bit of a welcome change to start off with a premium car if you didn't update GT5 previously. And it is handy for the first few events, which give you plenty to spend on the next car. But why bother giving me credits, especially with what 30,000 can get you at the start? It seems a bit ridiculous. The menu hub is much easier to navigate than GT5, much more organized with everything all in one menu, which makes where you want to get to more efficient, including dealerships, events, garage, settings, upgrades, where everything is all in GT Auto and the arcade mode. I wish the latter had more courtesy vehicles to choose from the start, but having all the circuits to race on from the get-go is nice. Good for recording footage that isn't the same car for this review. And it's a lot more aesthetically pleasing to look at with less use of random racing stock images, and the category of events being color-coded, though not having the event cards makes it look a little too boring, like there isn't as many events as it appears on the surface. However, what I noticed about the event selection is how much more linear the progression system feels. The leveling system has been replaced with something practically identical to Need for Speed Shift. You earn as many as 3 stars per win in each race, 2 for second, 1 for third, you get the idea. And once you earn enough stars from the events, it unlocks the license test, and passing that in turn unlocks the next tier of events. So no, you can't pass all the license tests in one go. And because events have power limits with cars being rated by their general performance like Forza Motorsport's class ratings, you can't just save up for a rocket ship and clear countless events in quick succession. For example, this Vision Gran Turismo Mercedes is a gift car if you install all the updates, but it's too powerful to be eligible for the novice event, so you can't use it straight away. On one hand, it gives you a good reason to drive more different cars in this game and less incentive to cheese your way through the GT mode, since it's so easy to do that in most Gran Turismo titles. Nothing wrong with that, like I've said, there's no such thing as the wrong way to play this game. But on the other, it's too linear. It makes every playthrough less unique, like everyone is being forced to use the same first car, follow the same events chronologically, and making license tests mandatory again. Basically, like almost every Gran Turismo title when you think about it, it sets a poor first impression, but for different reasons. Fortunately, like most Gran Turismo titles, when you kick it into another gear, it stays in gear. By the time you get to the National A events, there's enough to do where you can choose the order you want to complete them, and the licenses only have 5 tests each. No more driving from one spot to another or going around the same corner more than once with a different car to drag out the gameplay unnecessarily. And it's very easy to get the gold in every single one of them, meaning more prize cars in the garage. The events are what you expect from the GT series: Sunday Cup, Clubman Cup, Drivetrain Challenges, GT All-Stars, World Championship, Like the Wind, it's all there. Although endurance events have been significantly shortened to the point where it looks like a regular touring car race. Instead of 24 hours, for example, it's 24 minutes. Granted, it's nice seeing the developers having respect for players' time like that, because coming up with 24 continuous hours for a video game isn't easy to come by, especially if you're an adult. But endurance races are part of the novelty in the Gran Turismo franchise, all the way up to the very first game on the PS1. And nor are there as many special events, not as many special licenses like NASCAR, Top Gear, or World Rally Championship, but at least what's there provides nearly as much gameplay time, including the Goodwood Festival of Speed. Like this legendary annual event in real life, it's a compilation of many different cars on this iconic hill climb. A good excuse to drive many of the most recognizable vehicles, classic and modern. This is an event that's on the bucket list, that's for sure. Additionally, you have lunar exploration because why not? It's meant to be a recreation of the Apollo 15 landing in 1971, and you get to drive in the lunar rover that's so easy to roll over due to the low gravity. Now that's what I call a giant leap for mankind. Something I never would have expected in a sim racer, but has an incredible scope that makes you think just how crazy and dangerous these moon landings were back then.
Good. Heading to new target.
And available from downloading all those updates, the Sierra Time Rally, which is a time attack against the clock set on a giant 27-kilometer circuit with checkpoints scattered all over the place. The further you drive before the time runs out, the more points you get, with the car you're given providing a nitro system and opponents to overtake, which increase the multiplier and further add to the total score at the end.
Time overtake.
It's a neat novelty to have a game mode clearly inspired by arcade machines in a Gran Turismo title, better than I expected. However, the best special event, also available if you download the updates, is the lovely tribute to Ayrton Senna, which follows his life from his karting days all the way up to his F1 career, and might be my favourite part of Gran Turismo 6 thanks to Senna himself. Despite passing away before I was even born, in a way Senna was my introduction to Formula 1 with Super Monaco GP2 on the Sega Mega Drive, playing that a fair bit when I was a little kid, as well as the Top Gear tribute to Senna, watching the Senna documentary, and as I was getting into F1 in the mid to late 2000s, McLaren were my favourite team. Shame there's no McLaren MP44 in this game given their ties to Instituto Ayrton Senna and the number of other McLaren road cars in this game. I guess I'll have to wait until I review Gran Turismo 7, but you do get his go-karts, his championship winning British Formula 3 and 1985 Lotus F1, the 97T, which he won his first Grand Prix with, driving on 80s versions of Brands Hatch and Monza. And once you complete the events, you unlock a slideshow of the rest of his F1 career from 1988 to 1994 with 73 images and the short documentary Ayrton's Wish, which talks about how Senna was viewed in his home country, like a god basically, and his concern of the gap between the rich and poor. A couple of months before his death, he discussed with his sister Vivian of setting up a charitable organization to help children who are underprivileged in Brazil. Instituto Ayrton Senna was established on November 1994 by Vivian and has raised millions over the years, collaborating with F1 teams, manufacturers, and of course, video games. The journey this special event takes you on is incredible, almost getting a little emotional playing through it. I'm probably getting a little carried away, but apart from not being able to drive any of the McLarens or the Williams, there's literally nothing to criticize. It's such a well-crafted timeline of one of the greatest racing drivers of all time with such a big heart.
Seja quem você for, seja qualquer posição que você tenha na vida, nível altíssimo ou mais baixo, social, tenha sempre como meta muita força, muita determinação e sempre faça tudo com muito amor e com muita fé em Deus, que dia você chega lá, de alguma maneira você chega lá.
The Gran Turismo mode overall has the variety you'd expect from this franchise, and winning them earns you prize cars, and most of them are usually good enough to compete in the more difficult events, and if not, enough money would have been saved to that point to purchase some of your favourite models. And thanks to the circuit count in this game, it almost never feels like you're driving on the same racetrack. Maybe Autumn Ring Mini gets used far too often at the start, but here's one positive with sticking to the same console when making a follow-up to a racing game. You can reuse the assets, which already has a lot of content to begin with, and simply add more. With the exception of the Top Gear test track right after the TV show signed a partnership deal with the Forza franchise in 2011, every single racetrack from Gran Turismo 5 returns in 6, including the ones that were DLC like the Go-Kart Arenas, Twin Ring Motsugi, Spa, and Special Stage Route X, which is basically a replacement for Test Course. At that time, I didn't even know these were DLC for GT5. I thought all these circuits were new for GT6. What is new to this game though includes Silverstone, Willow Springs, Ascari, Brands Hatch, Red Bull Ring, Mount Panorama, Matterhorn, and a few returning OG classics including Apricot Hill and Midfield Raceway. Even if a couple don't get used in the career mode, the fact that you have 44 racetracks in Gran Turismo 6, and if you include reverse options on the original circuits, that's like 100. That is a crazy number of circuits to drive on, and the variety of sprints, hill climb, rally, street circuits, and speedways is unbelievably vast. There is a course maker that requires you to use an app on your phone to design them called Track Path Editor, but unfortunately thanks to the service shutting down and the app being taken off the store, I can't demonstrate. Though looking at the footage on YouTube, you have a lot more creative freedom compared to GT5's sliders. What's the weirdest circuit you ever saw made on this app? Let me know in the comments. The only thing that can match this sheer number of circuits is the cars available in this game as well, with 1,279 models total. I don't know any other racer that would come close to that number. It's almost hard to think of a road car that doesn't appear in this game. Even putting all the Japanese boxes and multiple variations of the same model, like there are over 30 Honda NSXs and over 50 Nissan Skyline GTRs. Even putting that into consideration, it's still a very impressive variety of models from all over the world. Again, Porsche is the only glaring omission because EA still had the exclusive license to have them in their Need for Speed titles. But that said, it's clear Gran Turismo is the name that every car manufacturer wants to be associated with. And thanks to Vision Gran Turismo, this also includes concept cars that might be too expensive to put into production, even by billionaire standards. But still cool to be able to drive them in a video game rather than just looking at 1x1 scale models. And I'm also impressed they released these through updates rather than requiring real money to buy them, like most games in general, even back then. Especially the Senate Tribute. If you had to pay, say, $20 Australian for this, and all proceeds going into the Senate Institute, I'd say it's worth it. There was a store to purchase in-game currency to get some of these cars faster, particularly handy if you were playing this online, but everything is obviously shut down. That's why there's no point talking about the online aspects anymore. And you clearly have more than enough here that DLC isn't necessary. Both cars, circuits, and racing overalls, the amount of total content, not just for a PS3 game, but for any racing game, even by today's standards, is simply bonkers. However, this sheer quantity of content in one video game comes at the cost of performance. One thing Gran Turismo 6 is criticized for to this day is just how unstable it is during gameplay, that it pushes the PS3 a bit too far. And if you look at the gameplay and replays for only a few seconds, it does look rough. While it tries to aim for 60 frames per second even with a 1080p resolution, on a larger or more detailed circuit it looks like it's slowing down to 30 frames on certain occasions. Even in the showroom when the cars rotate slowly, it looks very choppy. Again, reducing the resolution to 720p improves the performance, but playing this, you worry the PlayStation 3 was going to explode at any moment, especially when trying to update it. Additionally, there's plenty of screen tearing, shadow flicker, the shadow quality is low, and I don't know about you, but circuits don't look as detailed as they do even in Gran Turismo 5. It feels like I'm playing Gran Turismo 6 on the PlayStation 2 upscale with an emulator. The cars themselves, including returning ones, appear to be less detailed on all ends of the spectrum as well. The interior views aren't as immersive, and the engine noises are just awful. Not the cars themselves, to be clear, but the audio files for them in this game specifically sound very muffled and compressed. Given what cars sounded like in previous Gran Turismo titles, it's almost depressing what we got in GT6. At the time of this video, the original GT6 review was the most popular Gran Turismo review on my channel, and looking back, I was very positive towards the way it looks. I reviewed it just a few years after it was released, and back then I thought it looked awesome given how highly photorealistic these circuits are, particularly the world ones, and try to look exactly the way they do if you visit these places in real life. And if you look at the making of Gran Turismo 6, you can see a hell of a lot of effort has gone into recreating these cars and circuits, trying to capture and scan all the imperfections of the surface, like the roughness, the cracks and curbs. Most racing games usually make some exceptions with real-world circuits, like adding more grandstands, reusing assets like F1 games in the early 2010s, or Need for Speed Shift. Just look at Willow Springs in the latter. Now look at that circuit in Gran Turismo 6. Same console, by the way. It's just an empty desert by comparison, because that's what it looks like when you're driving there in real life. And when you're racing at night, that's when the graphics stand out positively. The track lights beaming on the car, it looks more colorful, and because there's no draw distance in the dark, it removes some of those technical issues. It's less choppy. The photo mode is identical from GT5, so there's no need to repeat myself. Though I do see a lot of photos taken using this feature in Gran Turismo games and shared on the ColourShed Discord server, so it's clearly a popular feature. I recommend joining if you haven't yet. It's worth noting we've gone past 2 generations and we're used to better graphics today. Remember, this came out after the PlayStation 4 console as well as the Xbox One, with Forza Motorsport 5 showcasing what an 8th generation sim racer can look like in 2013. So you gotta look at GT6 from a 7th generation perspective. Here's what Forza Motorsport 5 and GT6 look like side by side. Considering the latter is a generation behind, it goes to show you how impressive this looks. Some things just have to give on an aging console, less content, better graphics, or the other way around, and it's a very hard line to balance on in order to appease as many of the gamers as you can, depending on what they like to get out of a sim racing genre. What Polyphony would have done is focused on the areas players are more likely to pay attention to during gameplay, like the cars surrounding them and the corners. And anything beyond that is important, of course, to get the scope you want, but again, with this many circuits and cars in one game, on one disc. I'm not defending it, I'm just trying to come up with potential reasons as to why it looks the way it does, for better or worse. At least some of the models that were standard in GT5, like the Bugatti Veyron and Lamborghini Countach, are premium with a dedicated interior. Okay, they're not called premium or standard models anymore, but are now labeled simplified and detailed. But you can't tell which one is which until you select it, which is annoying. There's no used car dealership in this game, which means every single one available is compiled into a dealership big enough to override a giant city. I have mixed feelings about that. While it's useful not having to wait for your favorite model to appear like in GT5 or PSP, and nor do you need to reach a certain level to unlock the right to purchase a car, when you have literally dozens of the same model without any search filters, that makes it harder to find what you want than necessary. You can sort cars, and they even recommend certain models based on the class of events, but when you have nearly 1,300 to choose from, they could have done a better job than just categorize them by manufacturer. Though it is cool to see all these car brands in one menu. The customization features have slightly improved. You still have the same options from GT5, including upgrades, paint jobs, rims, body parts, with different ways to alter the style, including the stays, winglets, heights, and width. You can even add additional meters to the dashboard, but unless it's a racing car, it's kind of pointless information, especially if it doesn't show it in the interior view during gameplay. The only massive improvement is the racing gear, with multiple pattern and color options for the helmets and overalls, with literally hundreds to choose from, including special outfits from Tony Stewart, Dale Earnhardt Jr., Jeff Gordon, Sebastian Loeb, Sebastian Vettel, and Ayrton Senna. In terms of racing gear, there are a lot of color options you can match with your favorite cars. Shame the same can't be said for the cars themselves. Again, the colors of what you have in your garage are the only ones you can apply to the one you like. Like, have Polyphony even heard of a color wheel? So despite a few extra features, customization is still a big step back compared to the Forza titles, which allowed you to fine-tune the color for any of your cars in your garage along with decals and vinyls. Side note, in the Forza Motorsport 5 review, I made a big mistake. You can access the vinyls via the paint section in the menu, not the Forza Vista mode. I only discovered it while getting footage for this GT6 re-review, but at least I can now confirm the customization features in Motorsport 5 is far superior to Gran Turismo 6. Fortunately, the driving mechanics and physics are mostly solid. Car damage is only visual, AI opponents still recognize you on the track, the stiff chase cam, in my opinion about it, remains the same. It's only different in what you do with these cars because of the way the Gran Turismo mode has been restructured. For example, cars can be upgraded and tuned, obviously, but I didn't do it as much thanks to the prize cars being good enough to get the job done in another set of events. And the prize money you earn from them is higher even in the small events compared to GT5, so even though you don't win prize cars after earning every star in most of the single race events, the garage of cars early on is much larger, so upgrades weren't as dependable. And once again, you have the choice between A-Spec and B-Spec for all the races, as opposed to B-Spec having its own separate career mode when races were needlessly long. Now, the way it functions during races, you use the action buttons almost as if you're controlling the braking and accelerating, but not the handling. So you might as well just stick solely with the A-Spec mode. And considering the length of the endurance events in this game, I've never had a reason to resort to the B-Spec mode other than to demonstrate it for this review. The cars control well, and there are a lot of them, with a lot of places to drive on them. And it's impressive a game released this late into the life cycle of the PS3 was getting this much support. If you're talking about racing games without mods, pretend iRacing and Assetto Corsa don't exist. I don't know any other in the genre that has this many cars and circuits in one complete package without DLCs. Gaming companies today would unquestionably lock a lot of that behind a paywall. Just look at Gran Turismo 7 for example, which will get its own review in the future, I promise. This is essentially the complete edition of Gran Turismo 5, everything from that game including DLC and more. I'm not a fan of being forced to choose only one first car, and the star collecting system makes the experience more linear than it really needs to be, but at least it tries to be different enough as a sequel with the way the Gran Turismo mode is structured, and the more unique special events make it count as a full sequel. The menus are simpler to navigate, everything is in one place, reminds me of Gran Turismo 3 in some ways. However, it's the technical issues that stand out like a splinter, to the point where the console is always on the edge, and it can be very rough to watch sometimes. But I honestly give it the benefit of the doubt thanks to how photorealistic and accurate the circuits look for a PS3 game. Again, compared to other races on the same console, it's really not that bad. I think because it's been over a decade now, it's starting to show its age graphically, how it tries to push more for content so the graphics take a minor relegation as a result. Again, it's a question of quality over quantity. After reviewing Forza Motorsport 5, which came out only a month between each other, which has a tiny fraction of the vehicles but each one highly detailed, and also on next generation hardware, what would you prefer? Well, judging from comments, Gran Turismo 6 is the one remembered more fondly than Forza Motorsport 5, so maybe it was the right choice to put quantity over quality. Unfortunately, being released really late in the PS3's life cycle, it only sold 5.2 million copies, which still makes it one of the best-selling PS3 exclusives, but sadly, the lowest selling of the main series, even being outsold by Gran Turismo 5 Prologue. I think at the very least, Polyphony should have developed a port of Gran Turismo 6 on the PlayStation 4. It literally looks like it's begging for a version on that console. And imagine if Polyphony Digital did that, like literally the exact same game with the glitches cleaned up with graphical improvements to showcase what that console can do. And if they took an extra few years to make it, it's Gran Turismo on hardware at the prime of its life cycle, so of course it'll still sell well. My theory is that the PS3 is notorious for how complicated it was to make games for it, so a PS4 port, they would essentially need to build everything from scratch since both systems aren't exactly cross-compatible with each other. And imagine PS2 models in a PS4 game. Sure, they look even more detailed, and Forza supposedly continues to use Xbox 360 models even for Motorsport 23 on the Series X, but it would look a lot more obvious on the PS4. Honestly, what we got exclusive to the PlayStation 3 is still incredibly impressive and fun to play. There are only a tiny number of games that fully utilize the PS3 the way Polyphony did, and was PlayStation's last big exclusive title before Polyphony put total focus on the next generation and starting from scratch, with every vehicle and circle modeled specifically for their next release, Gran Turismo Sport, and that became one of the best-selling exclusives on that system, so no matter what, the Gran Turismo brand will always sell. And now that I finally re-reviewed all the Gran Turismo titles I originally made nearly a decade ago, it'll only be a matter of time when you'll get my perspective on these two games. Thank you Patreon supporters, including Anthony Cossins, Bibbs, Riddleback, Cooper Munn, Darcy McIntosh, Emmanuel Figueroa, Eric Barboza, Atmosphere, Indie DM, Ellen Craft, Nightkid Gaming, Peter GT, Roman Arteminov, Ruben Pekolk, Sam Sneed, Thomas Rosendale, UZ Racer, Will Stokes, and everyone for watching. Spenny out!